Okay, hey guys, welcome to another classroom session. This one is pre-recorded just because I don't have the time on Wednesday to actually do a live one, but that's okay. You'll still get all the information. I hope at least. So what I wanted to do in this classroom session is discuss a couple of things. Primarily the shape manipulation that you need to do in day one, because that is going to be rounding boxes, and I think a lot of you haven't done that before in the assignments. We have definitely covered it in other weeks, but if you weren't part of those weeks, then you might have missed that. I did do an instructional video at the time, but I didn't make a classroom about it, so I want to do that now so that I can give you guys a bit of a clearer idea of how you can round boxes or shapes in general, and how that basically works and how that can help you to create more aesthetically pleasing designs, right? All right, so let's go into it. As you can see, normally when we have a box, right, so a simple box, we can do two things to manipulate its edges. And so one of those things, and I'm going to just draw an edge, one of those things is what they call chamfering. And the chamfering is actually that we make a straight line between two points to cut off that corner, right? And make it a little less harsh. And so the resulting shape might look something like this. And that's what they call chamfering. Now, you can also round those corners, and in 3D, I think they call it filleting or something, or fillet. And so it's basically the same two points, but instead of going in a straight line, we actually go in a curve, which you could, view as an ellipse, for instance. And so the resulting shape will look like this. Now, when drawing boxes, you can either do singular manipulations or multiple manipulations. And so if we do that, let's draw a box. And I'm still a bit rusty today, so fingers crossed. Okay, so we have a box like this, and I'm just gonna see if I can sharpen this image a little bit because it seems a little bit out of focus. All right, that might be a little better. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to do a singular rounding. So same as here, but just onto this plane is I'm going to round off this corner. Then following my perspective, I'm going to follow it to the other side. I'm going to eyeball this a little bit. Same here to the other side. Like that, right? And if we connect those forms, what we end up with is a singular rounding of that plane. And now we can translate that down into this box. So we're basically following the points where we started, rounding the corners. We follow that down in perspective. Same here. Follow it down in perspective. And so we round off that corner again. Now the rounding on this side is going to stay the same, but we're not going to see the other side because of the silhouette of the box is going to cut, and pick up that edge of the ellipse. And same here, right? So we're gonna see a little bit of that rounding, and then we're going to pick up the silhouette of the box. Okay, so this is basically a single rounding, and the reason it's a single rounding is if we think about 3D, we have and I'm going to follow the perspective of this box, we have a z-axis, like this. We have a x-axis, like this. And we have a y-axis going vertically up and down. And now in this case, we've only manipulated the viewpoint from the y-axis, right? And so if we look with our eye down on this box, we will see those edges have been manipulated. However, if we look at it from the Z point of view, like this, you know, and our eye is somewhere over here, we would still see just a square, because if I follow the contours, we still have just a sharp fall off on the contours, right? And so the same would be true for the x-axis, sorry. It would still look like a square. Okay, I hope that's clear. Now, if we look at multiple roundings, what basically happens is if we draw a box again, all right, so a bit more of a wide angle box. What we're going to do now is we're going to use multiple roundings, and what that should what that should result in is that we, from each axis, we should see a manipulation of the form. Okay, now let's see how we can do that. Is basically we start with the same idea, the cutoff of those corners. But in order to create multiple roundings, we need to add a plane onto this. So we need to do a sort of addition when it comes to shape manipulation. And if you don't know the difference between addition and subtraction, please check out classroom session number 1, where I talk about it, and classroom session number 3, where I also mention the differences. We could do this in either a subtractive or an additive manner, but I find that it's easier to do it in an additive manner. And you'll see why in a second. So if I connect these corners, so the ones that I'm cutting off, right, they're going to be manipulated just like the singular rounding, right, like this. That's not going to change. But we're not now going to just finish our box. What we're going to do is we're going to go inwards, right, following our perspective. And then we're going to go up, equally in size. Now that doesn't mean equally in length, because we need to consider our perspective at all times. And so if we go up by this height, these points here that I'm now emphasizing will form another plane. Right, let me just do this to the best of my ability. All right. And now we're going to also create rounded sections on both the X and the Z axis. So let me do that in color, so maybe it might be easier for you guys to follow that. So we have the X axis in black. So we're rounding off on the X axis. Here, here, and here. But we're also rounding off on the Z axis, right? Here, 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 and here. And we already rounded off on the Y axis, okay? And now our resulting shape, or first let's do that on the bottom plane as well. So let's just go down on the Z axis. Let's go down on the X axis. And of course, then we can connect, and already manipulate on the Y axis. Same here and same here. And now if we want to create the same thing on the bottom plane, we just need to follow the same process. So basically this is internally now, right? So we can connect and then we go down. And so as you can see, or I hope that you can see, if we go down in a similar manner as the length that we're doing here, we're probably not even going to see any of this manipulation because of the perspective that we're having, right? So to some degree, we can ignore it. However, we do have to keep into consideration the roundings that we're doing here and here. So our silhouette is going to be slightly altered. And I hope that you can see that. So we're not even going to see this probably. Right, now let me use another color to create our rounded shape. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually, connecting all my outer silhouettes. Right, and this is our resulting multiple rounded shapes, because if we look at it from the Z-axis, we see a rounded shape. If we look at it from the X-axis, we would see a rounded shape as well. And again, same story for the Y-axis, right? Rounded corner. And so that's why we can consider this as a multiple rounding. Now, of course, we don't always have to round off the corners in an equal manner. We can easily round off a lot more on one side than on the other side. And so what I'll do is, because I have an example of that in the instructional video that I did from a long time ago, is I'm going to add that into this classroom session so you guys can check that out. And because this is pre-recorded, every one of you will be able to see that from the get-go. It's where I basically use multiple ways to round off a shape to create a resulting shape. All right, so I'm going to play that first, and then we'll go and continue into this classroom. So
All right, okay, guys. So I'm going to do one example of what I'm kind of expecting you to do for day one of this week's assignment. And this is going to probably come back multiple times. So we'll definitely review this in the future. What I like you to do is pick one color for the establishing box that you'll use your perspective for. And then you're going to pick another color for drawing the actual rounded shape. Okay? So try to draw with your shoulders, or your elbow. I'm kind of restricted here because I need to shoot this top down, and I'm sitting right in front of the camera. So it's kind of harder for me, but you can just flip your paper as much as you want and get as comfortable as you can to really get those smooth strokes. Okay. So we're going to pick kind of an extreme angle here, maybe something like this. And then all right, something like that. So it doesn't have to be perfect. I just need to know what my establishing box is. And then I'm going to start making a rounded shape. So I'm going to do probably a combination of the singular and the multiple rounding. So I'm going to start off by choosing my points here and then get my first rounding in. Like that. Follow that through to here. I'm not yet committing to all lines. Maybe coming down here, maybe breaking up somewhere here, and then doing a little rounding here as well. Same here. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to go over, follow my perspective. Same here, follow my perspective. Get that rounded shape in. Like this. Follow through to the other side, follow my perspective. I'm just going to keep it there for a second because I'm going to probably use a multiple rounding on the top and maybe on the front as well. So let's just work our way down first. Like this. All right. Just thinking about what we could do. All right. Now let's move in a bit. So I'm going to move in something like this. Same here. Can follow my perspective, see if that's right. And then we're going to move up just slightly, as you saw in the demo. So, and this will be my rounding. And then same here, follow my perspective. Get approximately the same height. It's going to be a bit shorter here because we have an extreme perspective. Like this. And then we're going to need to follow that. So we're going to go inwards and a bit upwards. As you can see, I'm estimating these things. All right, and then downward. What we could do is have it fade in a little bit, but I'm not sure how that's going to look. So we're just going to keep it for now. Like this. Like that. So as you can see, I'm breaking my silhouette. So it's going to be a little different. That's why I'm not committing to all lines yet. So I'm just following my perspective line to the other side. I established it one. I'm coming in at approximately the same length here. And then going up, checking if that checks with my perspective. Seems about right. And then I'm committing to that rounding. Same on the other side. Just eyeballing it a bit. Like that. Okay. Then we're going to have another rounding at the back. Same at the back here. Like this. So my resulting silhouette looks a bit like this. My edge gonna look a bit like this. I'm gonna follow through to this one, same thing. If I look at where this point starts, and then we're gonna come in and a bit outwards. We're going outwards now following this perspective. Here we were going upwards because we were raising the volume. But if you follow that through to the other side, we're changing planes. So we're actually going outward here. And then doing the same thing, making a rounding like that. So as you can see, we have quite a dramatic volume change. Like this. Like this. I'm gonna turn my paper just a little bit. All right. So we have these two connecting, and then we have this line connecting. We have this line connecting, and then this one is a bit misleading because it's actually this one coming up and then going back in perspective. Okay, and then we're going to go down here. We're going to go straight. And then maybe I want to punch a hole in here. Now, instead of using just guidelines, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check where my center is. So then that diagonally should be around here. And I'm going to draw my one of my vanishing points to one of my vanishing points, and this is going to serve as my minor axis. So if I draw a 90-degree major axis, the ellipse should look something like that. All right. And now I can just follow this line. And that line. And then maybe we can make a rounded edge in here as well. Like this. Something like that. reconnect my silhouette. I'm just going to finish off this line. Let's just reinforce the silhouette now. All right. So this is our resulting shape. It doesn't have to represent anything. It just needs to, look like a solid shape with some rounded edges and some, multiple roundings, some singular roundings, anything that works for you and that you can, understand. So if we were to look at the profile view of this face, like this, we would see that we would have, we have our box. Like that. And then I chose to make a big rounding here, a small rounding here, small rounding here, small rounding here. And then halfway here, I chose to cut a hole in there, make some rounding here as well. And then I elevated the rounding here. To make that double edge, as you can see. All right.
All right, so I hope that was informative. Now, continuing on, what I briefly want to cover first is that the rounding of things, or the chamfering, doesn't only exist, in boxes. We could use it on other shapes as well. And then I'm primarily thinking of ellipses. So what we have when we want to chamfer an ellipse is that, let's just first draw a cylinder like this. No, let's just do it like this. All right. Now, in order to chamfer this cylinder, what we basically need to be aware of is our minor axis. Right? And then we need to create an ellipse that is in front of this one. So what I can do is draw it like this. And then basically the difference between the rounding and the chamfering is going to be how I connect those edges. So if I connect those silhouette edges in a straight line, we basically chamfered this cylinder, right? And so on the other side, we would have barely visible straight lines as well. Let me do that again a little bit more clearly. So let's maybe do a straight one. So we have a cylinder like this, and then we can have straight edges like this, which would give us this chamfering of that cylinder. Now we can do the exact same thing, but instead of going straight, we just, we think about those roundings. Now that could be that would open up the silhouette a little bit. And so let's see what that does. Right, and then we would have our cylinder like this. Now, I hope that's clear, and you can do that a lot more, in a more extreme manner, of course, where you have maybe a smaller ellipse and then like a softer fillet, like this. And then, the rest of our cylinder. And then we could have the same on the other side. Let's just follow that minor axis. We have our smaller ellipse on this side. And then we have that, rounding off of that corner more like this. Right? So that's how it would basically work for cylinders. All right, I hope that's clear. Now, if you know these two principles, these are great ways, combined with the subtraction and additive, shape manipulation. This is a great way to make more interesting designs. So as you can see, I did one during, I think, a live session with the students, where we just basically practice drawing a simple box in a variety of angles and perspectives, and then start using those manipulation techniques where we either chamfer or fillet or round the corners, and also subtract shapes from that box or add them to the box in order to create interesting designs. And this is basically, if you do this enough, that's how you basically can come up with interesting shapes and forms for your mechs, right? Or your guns or whatever. But as the topic is, mechs for this current week, at the date of this recording, but if you're being referred to this video for gun design or sci-fi prop design or whatever, this is basically a very, very useful fundamental technique that you can keep in the back of your mind in order to start creating interesting shapes. All right, and so let's look at just some examples from really cool resources. And the resource that I mentioned in the instruction, or in the beginning of the instructional video this week, was from Overwatch, for instance. And so I'm just going through the book for now, finding some example that might help you, or might help me explain this principle a little more. Okay, so if we look at, for instance, we have the Winston character, and he has a shoulder pad, right? And so instead of the shoulder pad looking like, when we first learn about shapes, instead of the shoulder pad looking like this, right? And I'm already triangulating it a little bit. Right? So instead of the shoulder pad looking like this, which is really, really rudimentary, and it really doesn't look manufactured, especially it really doesn't look futuristic. And that's, primarily the goal of Overwatch, or the idea of this genre, is to look somewhat, sci-fi, or at least a little bit futuristic. So the materials and the overall shapes should translate, or convey that feeling as well. And so what they do instead is, and let me just do that in red first, is they not only do they round off the corners to the middle like this, right? They also add a section on top, albeit a smaller section like this, which is basically a chamfered section. Now this could also be a rounded section where we just have rounded section like this. Kind of depends on the aesthetic that you want to go for. And instead of this being straight, it's actually a rounded edge, right? And it's also rounded towards the middle. And so the resulting shape looks more like this. All right. And then, of course, some design detailing and stuff like that. It makes it look more manufactured. But that's basically the idea, right? And so this looks a lot more futuristic and a lot cooler. Let's look at another example that might emphasize this. Again, I'm just going through the book, trying to find some cool reference for you guys. All right, so I think this is also a great example. I'm just looking at miscellaneous, and I'm just gonna pop him in here for a second so you guys can see. It's miscellaneous, just miscellaneous heroes. It's some sort of robot turret, I guess. I'm not an expert on Overwatch, by the way. And so the cool thing is that this is like a pivot joint, right? And if you hopefully learned some about pivot joints, you basically know that a pivot joint is a joint that is, if you look at it from the side, it's a joint that sits, in here, and it rotates, it can rotate 360 degrees. If you look at it in perspective, I'm just going to draw true to form. It's basically a rod that goes through here. It might, go further like that. And so this part can basically rotate around that rod. Okay, but instead of creating something that looks unappealing, it looks functional, but it's unappealing. What they do is they combine all that knowledge of, subtraction, addition, the rules of design, of course, big, medium, small, but especially that chamfering or rounding of form to make the design in question look more functional. And so if we look at the example, let me just get a good look at it. Instead of this, what they're doing is using a little bit of rounding in the corner, like this. And then it, so this is a rounded corner, so that goes like this. And then we have basically a half sphere, or half cylinder, sorry. Like this. And then we have that, rod that I was talking about here in red. So that sits within this design. And that's basically a chamfered cylinder. Like this. And then it goes further into just a regular cylinder. And that is connected to another piece, which basically the gun design of that thing. Also just a little bit chamfered. Again, I'm not going to draw the entire thing, but I just want to make my point across. Right, and so then we have the same thing kind of mirrored on the other side. Just checking my perspective. And the design is definitely off a little bit. Not to mention way off. All right. So let's do that again. A little bit cleaner, because this was bad. So, like this. And this is basically our rounded edge. Like that. And I'm going to first draw that chamfered cylinder like this. As you can see, I'm going quiet because this does require a lot of focus and attention. Right, and then we had that other cylinder sitting in here like this, right? So again, it's not perfect, but as you can see, what they're using is a large combination of the chamfering that you see here, right? And the rounding of the corners that you see subtly here, right? Even here is a little bit rounded, right? To make it a little bit more, ergonomic and manufactured and, stress-proof, apparently, primarily. These edges are rounded. So it's all, it's not super tight, it's not super technical, but it does give you a really pleasing aesthetic of shapes. And that's what they're trying to do. And that's what you see in a lot of other designs as well. For instance, if I just take this random piece of gear that I'm seeing here in the book, again, instead of just drawing, let me try to do that. As they're showing it right here. Right, so instead of just drawing this ugly piece of mechanic, what they're doing is they're using their knowledge of, shape manipulation to make those shapes a lot more appealing, especially the rounding and the chamfering. Again, so we have that shape going upwards, and then those corners are rounded a little bit like this. And then we're going into perspective like that. We have a little bit of a cut here. That also adds to the appeal of design, of course. Like this. And then what they do is they add another plane. Like this here, and this is basically the chamfering of those corners. And then again we have some sort of cut. Another cut inward. Something like that. Again, it's not as easy to do with the fine liner in this demonstration, and I'm kind of rushing it as well, which I shouldn't, but I don't have a lot of time. But as you can see, they're using these methods to make more appealing shapes, and I think that's a really interesting way to go about it, and to make more interesting shapes and designs, and to make your functional quote unquote parts of your design look even more functional, because the shapes are definitely going to help with the believability of the overall aesthetic. If you just have like a mech that has like these simple cylinders attached to simple boxes, it's not going to look believable. It's going to look mechanized. It's probably going to look functional to a certain degree, but it's going to look very mannequinized and not really realistic, right? So try to do it in a very careful way, not as rushed as I did here. But again, I just wanted to get the point across, more like I did here, easy, thought out, controlled. Just start with a box, and it doesn't, even if you want to do this on the side, it doesn't even have to look functional. Just make interesting shapes that can lead to something, or that can fill your visual library, and that will definitely lead to better designs when you're drawing mechs. Okay, so again, I hope this was useful, and as always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the Discord. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. Bye-bye.